Glorify the Lord, magnify the Lord, for Jesus is so good, and He will be with you. Glorify the Lord, magnify the Lord, for Jesus is so good, and He will be with you. Worship Him, love Him, people of God. Know His love, serve Him, people of God. Worship Him, love Him, people of God. Know His love, serve Him, people of God. He will take away your tears and all your strife. Glorify the Lord, magnify the Lord, for Jesus is so good, and He will be with you. Lord is light, He is light, walk in His light. He's our friend, He's our guide, showing the path. Lord is light, He is light, walk in His light. He's our friend, He's our guide, showing the path. Lifting our hands towards His holy face. Glorify the Lord, magnify the Lord, for Jesus is so good, and He will be with you. Praise the Lord, give Him thanks, keep His commands. He answers all who call on His name. Praise the Lord, give Him thanks, keep His commands. He answers all who call on His name, giving His life to all who trust in Him. Glorify the Lord, magnify the Lord, for Jesus is so good, and He will be with you. Glorify the Lord, magnify the Lord, for Jesus is so good, and He will be with you.
Of Christ the light, Christus Jyoti. This is an occasion truly of Eucharist, of thanksgiving. In the course of these next 35-40 minutes, I would like to direct your attention to the winding path towards which this event took place. There are three particular channels, if you like, in which I will direct our attention because they all coincide, in a sense, in God's providence. These channels concern that event 50 years ago, the International Eucharistic Congress, the 38th International Eucharistic Congress, which took place in this city of Mumbai. We will talk somewhat of that. We will consider also the other very important contextual situation in which the 38th International Congress took place. I've no need to remind you of that. It's just recently, 2 years ago or so, that we celebrated 50 years of the Second Vatican Council being celebrated. And it was in the course of that very celebration that the Congress took place here in Bombay. So, I've got books there, I'm not going to refer to them now, but I refer to them in what I've written and different points that I'm pulling out in the course of this talk on the account of the Congress. Wonderful speakers who came here, who spoke with the whole inspiration that energized the Second Vatican Council, namely to, well, the word that was used is the word that Pope John the 23rd, blessed Pope John the 23rd, emphasized, aggiornamento. Everyone knows what that means. Bringing up to date. But what could be more up to date than Christ, who is our contemporary, and Christ who, through the mystery of the Eucharist, reaches out to us, and with the imagination which only God can have, is able to communicate what is important for our lives. I want to begin this first picture is where really the narrative begins. And the third channel, of course, is the 50th anniversary of the congregation coming here, which we'll also be looking at briefly in connection with the founding fathers from Australia who came to Bombay. We begin, though, with where God begins. God so loved the world that He sent His only begotten Son into it. And the Word was made flesh, dwells with us, full of grace and truth. It's the redemptive incarnation. There's a lot of talk, I know, when I was studying in the 60s, about the incarnation, the importance of the incarnation. Because this is this bringing up to date, getting to know the God who is down to earth. The Bishop of Durham, David Jenkins, some time ago, an Anglican bishop with whom I worked, he gave me that phrase. We have a down-to-earth God. A God who really mucks in with us and knows our difficulties, our problems, our hungers, such as the theme of the Congress, the International Congress in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, 1976. The hungers of the human family. This is what Father so beautifully and most movingly spoke about, the one bread. God who makes Himself this bread. With the redemptive incarnation, as the great theologian Henri de Lubac insisted. It's not just incarnation, it is redemptive. Because we must acknowledge this is our deepest hunger, our deepest need, namely to be redeemed from that aspect of ourselves which somehow went wrong and which we tend to cling to. The great fathers of the church, whom I was privileged to study, and who have been my lifelong study, in fact, like Irenaeus, whose book about all things being recapitulated in Christ, taking the Pauline theme, of course, or Tertullian, who spoke about the flesh being the hinge of salvation. Athanasius, why did God become man? He became man so that we might be gods. This is something really quite shocking. But it's so that we could share in the divine nature. There's that text from the second letter to Peter, which is so important, which actually is recalled at every celebration of the Eucharist, no? When we add a drop of water into the chalice, that he who marvelously created human nature, yet more wonderfully divinized it. This is the prayer, of course, of the Christmas liturgy of the Word was made flesh. It's the collect there. It comes from very ancient times. It comes from the Leonine and the Gelatian sacramentaries way back in the 6th turn of the 7th century. And Gregory of Nyssa, who spoke about the renewal of the image of God in human beings. And Augustine, taking that same theme, putting it into the terminology of the Latin Church, who speaks about the deification of humankind. All this, you see, is to do with the Eucharist and the new man. Probably I have to be more gender conscious, and I should say the Eucharist and the new humanity, or the Eucharist and the new man and woman. But we know what we're talking about, don't we? Yes. This mystery has to be communicated. The Word became flesh for the life of the world. And so we enter into a sacramental economy of salvation. This is terribly important, because how would we recall, how would we be able to enter into God's language, except that, as the great Balthasar said at a conference in Assisi in connection with the liturgy in 1958 in preparation for the International Vatican Council, God speaks a human language. It's a wonderful article in that series of papers that were given at Assisi in 1958. Unless a man be born again, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood. All this is summed up in the Johannine imagery of the vine and the branches, and also in St. Paul's great teaching about communion with Christ. I live now. No, not I, but Christ lives in me. This is our new identity. This is the new humanity. Christ lives in me. This is what this man, Peter Julian Aymar, realized so deeply. And in the course of his life, of his winding path to holiness, his winding path to be a disciple and an apostle of the Eucharist, he continually emphasized and taught to make known to his contemporaries and to spread the fire of the Eucharistic zeal to the four corners of the earth. Wonderful vision, but a vision born of the passion of a heart alive in Christ, a heart that had encountered Christ, that adored Christ, that longed to communicate the importance of coming into communion with Christ. In Father Emar's teaching throughout his life, you see this development there. How towards the end of his life, after a tremendous experience, he began to teach a lot more about the importance of communion, and communion being given to the poor, to the waifs of Paris that his son saw around him. His apostolate of communion is tremendous, and it's this apostolate of communicating the reality that Christ lives in us, Christ the new man. That is a possibility. It's not just a theory. It's not just a philosophy. Christ is not just an ideology. Christ is present and conquering the world for God's glory in love. That, by the way, on the side there you see the picture of the chapel where he began his ministry. Perhaps ironically, the name of the street in those days, it's now all changed in Paris, was the Rue d'Enfer, which means the street of hell. But he brought heaven on earth. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. And where the Eucharist is, there is heaven, Peter Julian said so often. Now, all this, he established the first exposition of the Blessed Sacrament on the Feast of the Epiphany, the manifestation of the Lord. And it was very interesting, and there's a very close and wonderful, intimate connection with this city, Bombay, because there was a Capuchin Swiss bishop who was the vicar apostolic of Bombay, who happened to be passing through Paris. He had some business to do in Paris. And somehow or the other, Peter Julian met him and got him to come and celebrate Mass, at the end of which Peter Julian made exposition of the Blessed Sacrament and was the first adorer. And so that's how the exposition of the Blessed Sacrament as an essential feature of the congregation's identity and mission is realized. We have to now realize how the congregation spread. This fire spread. This zeal carried people to the ends of the earth. And it began first of all there in Europe, and then it spread to the United States, and from the United States it went to Australia, where at the Eucharistic Congress actually in 1929, the bishop met the Superior General or some authorities of the congregation and invited the congregation to Australia. That began there in 1929. Now, we're coming to where we are here because it was during the Second Vatican Council, with its thrust towards renewing the whole church centered on the Eucharist. The Eucharist, you've heard this phrase so often, I think, the source and summit of evangelization, the source and summit of holiness. It was at the Second Vatican Council that the Cardinal Archbishop of Mumbai, a man who was gracious in name and in nature, Valerian, met the Superior General of the congregation and got to know the congregation at St. Claudio Church in the center of Rome, where many clergy and bishops, especially during the Vatican Council, used to go for adoration. And he invited the congregation to come here. Now, a lot of discussion and so on, but then the International Congress was going to take place here, Eucharistic Congress, and so it was appropriate that this congregation had a center here as a sort of a spiritual memorial. There were two other very important memorials. The most important, the primary memorial of the 38th International Eucharistic Congress was, of course, the setting up of St. John's Medical Center in Bangalore. And the other was the establishing of a school here for the deaf and dumb. But the spiritual memorial that would be permanent was to be here at St. Francis Xavier's Chapel in Colaba. But for this, the Australian province was asked, and most generously and joyously and enthusiastically responded. We have that man as is photographed above the door of this hall, in fact, Len McKenna, who actually was my first provincial. Because I remember the excitement there in the seminary when Len McKenna came and said, you know, we've been invited to go to India now. And he came and sorted out things, the practicalities that had to be sorted out, and it was by the time of the Eucharistic Congress, which was in November, at the end of November, the community, a small community of 4, 2 priests and 2 brothers, was established here. Father McKenna himself followed and served here for many, many years. And it's to such people as Father Saker said, you know, that we owe a great deal for establishing the roots of the congregation here in Mumbai and in India, because it spread from here. Thank you. Well, that's just a glance into that. And I would like to, if I may, recall a personal thing. When I went to enter the congregation, because my family was living at that time in New Zealand, and well, I went over to Australia and to St. Francis Church, and the director of vocations took me to the sacristy, and from the sacristy into the sanctuary, there's a glass panel. You could see only one way. And we were looking into the sanctuary, and there was a priest in adoration, and there was a brother. And Father John McGill was his name, the director. He said to me, Michael, that's where we spend the best part of our life. And I knew that my vocation was Eucharistic from that moment. Anyhow, that glance into the church here just brings that memory back to mind. Excuse me for the personal recollection, but it's so important. And so many people, you know, are focused by exposition of the Blessed Sacrament. There's the great Macquarie, an Anglican theologian at Oxford, who's written a wonderful little book about the importance of exposition for the channeling of our lives towards Christ. Because as we contemplate Christ, well then, the light of Christ penetrates us and transforms us. Holy, even as I am holy, says the Holy Scriptures. We're all called to this holiness. But what is this holiness? This holiness can only be discovered through, with, and in Christ. communion with Christ. So the spirit of communion is so important. Pope Paul VI exemplified this in his exquisite courtesy and his great attentiveness to everyone. I met someone recently the other day here who said he was an altar boy and he was very near Paul VI, and how Paul VI just so kindly helped him with something or the other. But his exquisite kindness and sensitivity was to various other religions, other than Christian, apart from, of course, the ecumenical thrust there. There were various meetings. All this is recorded in the books there about the Congress. Some wonderful speeches given by different people. But also very attentive there to the celebration of the liturgy according to the mind of the Second Vatican Council. You might say that the 38th International Eucharistic Congress happened 2 years, a year and a half, after the promulgation of the famous document Sacramentum Concilium, was a test case of implementing the reforms, the liturgical reforms of the Second Vatican Council. And in those books of the Acts of the Congress, we read how, for the first time ever, there was, in modern times, that is because this goes back to patristic times, there was concelebration. And this was something very new for the church. There was also communion under two kinds for a reserved number of people, something which some centuries ago, for very good reasons, had been put aside. But something that is utterly important and something tremendously encouraged in the documents of the Second Vatican Council. Because unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, the complementarity of the signs of the Eucharist, we are in a sacramental communication, after all, sacramental redemption. And this is something which, we must always learn. Italians have to learn this a lot still. It's only very small groups who will have communion under two kinds, and I understand for numbers and various health reasons and so on. But that must be taught, at least, the importance of realizing, of eating and drinking. When we're invited to a meal or something somewhere, we aren't just given something to eat, we're also given something to drink. Okay, this was an important aspect there that was actually celebrated at the Congress in certain groups. So the climax of the whole celebration, of course, was the Statio Orbis, the gathering